He had always thought he would get over her. After all, so many years had passed. 30 years to be exact. But no matter how much time went by, he couldn't quite shake the feeling that something in his life was missing. She had been his first love, the one who had filled his heart with warmth and excitement when they were just teenagers. They had shared a bond that at the time seemed unbreakable, but life, as it often does, took them in different directions. He remembered the day they had first met. It was one of those perfect summer afternoons. They were both at a friend's party, surrounded by laughter and the sound of music. The moment he saw her, something clicked. There was an ease about her, a way she smiled that made him feel like the world was a little bit brighter. She had a laugh that was contagious, and he found himself drawn to her like a magnet. The way she spoke, the way she looked at him with those wide, curious eyes. It was as though they were the only two people in the room. They spent the entire evening talking, laughing and sharing stories about their lives. He had never felt so comfortable with someone so quickly. It was like they had known each other forever. And maybe in some strange way they had. But life, as it always does, had other plans. She moved away shortly after that summer. And although they promised to stay in touch, the distance soon began to take its toll. Letters turned into phone calls, and phone calls turned into sporadic messages. And before long, they had lost touch altogether. Years passed, and life continued. He went on to finish school, started his career, and eventually married someone else. But every now and then, his thoughts would drift back to her, to the way she made him feel alive, like nothing else in the world mattered when he was with her. He often wondered what had happened to her, where life had taken her. He hoped she was happy, but a part of him always wished they had been able to keep in touch, to see what might have happened if they had given their love a chance. The years had changed him, just as they had changed her. He had grown older, more settled in his life, but the ache in his chest, the longing to know what could have been, never fully went away. He had never told anyone about his feelings for her. It felt like a secret that only he carried, locked away in the deepest corners of his heart. He often found himself wondering if she ever thought about him, if she ever wondered what could have been. But as time passed, he convinced himself that it didn't matter. She had moved on, and so had he. But then one evening, something unexpected happened. He received an invitation to his high school reunion. At first, he was hesitant. It had been so long since he had seen anyone from that time in his life. But there was something about the invitation that made him feel like it might be worth going. Maybe it was the nostalgia of those carefree days, or maybe it was the chance to reconnect with people from his past. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was another reason, a more personal one. He hadn't seen her in so many years. What if she was there? What if, by some twist of fate, he could see her again? The thought filled him with both excitement and fear. He hadn't realized just how much he had missed her, how much a part of his life she still was until the invitation arrived. He tried to push the thought out of his mind, telling himself that he was just imagining things. But the possibility of seeing her again lingered like a shadow, following him everywhere he went. The night of the reunion arrived, and he found himself standing outside the venue, his heart racing. He wasn't sure what he was expecting, but he knew he had to go inside. He took a deep breath and walked through the door, the sounds of laughter and chatter greeting him as soon as he stepped inside. The room was filled with familiar faces, people he hadn't seen in years. There were old friends, classmates, and even a few teachers, but it was the sight of her that took his breath away. She was standing across the room, talking to someone, laughing in that same carefree way he remembered so well. Time had changed her, of course. She was older, but there was still something about her that made his heart skip a beat. She hadn't noticed him yet, but he couldn't take his eyes off her. It was as if the years had melted away, and they were back in that summer, the first time they met. He hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. Should he approach her? Should he say something? Or would it be better to let the past stay in the past? But before he could decide, she looked up and their eyes met. For a brief moment, it felt like the whole world stopped. She smiled, and that smile, so familiar, so warm, was all he needed. He walked toward her, his heart pounding in his chest. As he got closer, she turned to face him fully, and he could see the surprise in her eyes. "Wow," she said, her voice filled with disbelief. "I can't believe it's really you." He smiled, feeling the same sense of disbelief. "It's been a long time," he said, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. She nodded, her eyes scanning his face as though trying to place the years between them. You look different, she said with a laugh, but it wasn't a mean laugh. It was warm, full of the same kindness he remembered. He chuckled. I guess we both do. They both stood there for a moment, unsure of what to say next. The years had stretched between them, but it felt like no time had passed at all. For a moment they simply took each other in, the silence comfortable yet filled with unspoken questions. How have you been? She asked, breaking the silence. He smiled, but it was a bittersweet smile. I've been good. You know, life happened. She nodded in understanding, but there was something in her eyes, something that told him she had been carrying a similar weight of memories, just like he had. She had never forgotten him either. They spent the rest of the evening talking, catching up on everything that had happened since they last saw each other. He listened to her stories about her life, her travels, and the people she had met. It was clear that she had lived a full life just as he had. But there was something about the way she spoke, the way she looked at him, that made him realize one thing: they were still connected, despite the years, despite the distance. As the night went on, he found himself thinking about how much had changed and how much had stayed the same. They were different people now, but in some ways they were still the same teenagers who had met that summer so long ago. The man couldn't help but wonder if there was a chance, even after all these years, that something could come of this reunion. Could they still have the connection they once shared? Could he find the courage to say what he had never said all those years ago? As the evening came to a close, they said their goodbyes, but it felt different now. There was an understanding between them, an unspoken recognition that the years had passed. But some things, like their connection, remained unchanged. But as he walked out into the cool night air, his heart was heavy with a question that had been waiting for 30 years to be answered. Would he ever find the courage to say the words he had been holding back all this time? After the reunion, the man couldn't stop thinking about her. Every day he found himself replaying their conversation in his mind, remembering the warmth of her smile, the way her voice had sounded when they talked, the glint in her eyes when they reminisced about the past. It was like the reunion had opened a door he had long locked away. The memories, the emotions, they all rushed back, filling him with both longing and fear. He hadn't expected the reunion to affect him so deeply. It had been years since they last spoke, and he had convinced himself that he had moved on. But now the simple act of seeing her again had shaken something inside him. For the first time in a long time, he felt alive in a way he hadn't realized he was missing. The thought of her, of what could have been, gnawed at him every day. He tried to distract himself with his routine, his job, his family, his responsibilities. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't push her out of his thoughts. She was everywhere, in the things he saw, in the places he went, even in the songs that played on the radio. The thought of what could have been never left him. He hadn't been able to stop wondering. Was there still a chance for them? His wife, though loving and kind, had noticed a change in him. He had always been a man of routine, of steady predictability. But lately he had become distant, lost in his own thoughts. She had asked him what was bothering him, but he hadn't known how to explain. How could he explain that seeing someone from his past had reignited feelings he had buried so deeply? It felt impossible to put into words. How could he tell her that after all these years, he still thought about a love he had let slip away? His wife was understanding, but the man could sense the growing distance between them. He wasn't fully there, and she knew it. He loved her. He truly did. But there was a part of him that had always remained unspoken, a part of him that was still stuck in the past, wondering what could have been. As weeks went by, the feeling only grew stronger. He found himself daydreaming about her again, imagining what it would be like to have another chance. What if things had turned out differently? What if they had stayed in touch all these years? Could they have built a life together? The questions kept swirling in his mind, each one leading to the same conclusion. He needed to see her again. But how? How could he reach out to her after all this time? He didn't want to disrupt her life, and he certainly didn't want to cause any trouble. She had moved on just as he had. They had both lived full lives, and there was no reason to dig up the past. But the longing in his heart wouldn't let him rest. Every day it felt like he was holding something back, something so simple yet so impossible to say. He thought about reaching out to her. Maybe a letter or a message, something small, something simple. He could say hello, catch up a little, but it felt wrong to start with such small talk. He needed to be honest with himself, with her. He needed to tell her the truth, but how could he say it after all these years? One evening, as he sat at his desk, lost in thought, his phone buzzed. It was a message from her. The moment he saw her name on the screen, his heart skipped a beat. She had reached out. The words on the screen were simple enough, just a friendly message to say she hoped he was doing well, that it was great seeing him at the reunion, and that it would be nice to catch up sometime soon. His fingers hovered over the screen as he read the message again. Should he respond? He knew he couldn't just let this moment pass. He had to reply, and he knew it had to be honest. He couldn't just say, "I'm fine," or "It was great seeing you too." This was his chance, and if he let it slip away, he might regret it forever. He typed back carefully, taking his time with each word, making sure it conveyed the sincerity he felt. He told her how much he had enjoyed seeing her again, how it had brought back so many memories. He said he had been thinking about her ever since, and that maybe they could meet up soon, just to talk, to catch up properly. The moment he hit send, his heart pounded in his chest. What if she didn't respond? What if she had moved on completely, and this was just a polite message to acknowledge the reunion? He tried not to think about it, but it was hard not to let the doubt creep in. The minutes passed slowly, each one feeling like an eternity. Then finally his phone buzzed again. She had replied. His eyes quickly scanned the message, and as he read her words, a wave of relief washed over him. She had agreed to meet. She was just as eager to reconnect as he was. They made plans to meet at a small cafe in the city, a place that had always held special meaning for them both. It was the kind of place they had frequented when they were younger, when life was simpler, when they could sit for hours, talking about their dreams and their futures. He hadn't been there in years, but the thought of sitting there with her again brought back a rush of memories. As the day of their meeting approached, the man's nerves grew. He wasn't sure what to expect. Would it be awkward? Would the years between them make it impossible to reconnect? He didn't know, but he couldn't deny the excitement that fluttered in his chest every time he thought about seeing her again. When the day finally arrived, he was filled with anticipation. He arrived at the cafe early, nervously checking his watch. He sat down at a table near the window, hoping to catch a glimpse of her as soon as she walked in. His mind raced with all the things he wanted to say, all the emotions he had kept hidden for so long. But what if it wasn't the same? What if they were different people now? What if the spark they had once shared had faded? Then he saw her. She walked through the door, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on him. A smile spread across her face, and for a moment it was as if no time had passed at all. She looked the same, though older, just like him. But there was that same warmth in her eyes, the same spark that had always drawn him to her. "Hey," she said, her voice soft but full of the same energy he remembered. "Hey," he replied, standing up to greet her. "It's been a long time." She smiled again, sitting down across from him. They exchanged pleasantries, small talk at first, but soon the conversation flowed more easily. They talked about their families, their jobs, their lives. But even as they talked about everything and nothing, there was an unspoken understanding between them. They both knew why they were here. They both felt it, the pull to reconnect, to understand what had been lost all those years ago. As they talked, the man realized that despite all the changes, despite the passage of time, he hadn't let go of the feelings he had for her. And as the evening wore on, he knew it was time. Time to say the things he had kept locked away for so long. But as he opened his mouth to speak, the words caught in his throat. He had waited so long, built up so many expectations that he didn't know how to start. How could he say it? How could he explain the depth of what he had felt all these years? But for now, he would wait. He knew that this was just the beginning. The beginning of something they had both waited for so long. The days after their meeting seemed to move in slow motion. The man had felt a wave of emotion and relief when he saw her again. And yet there was still an underlying tension that made him question what he was really doing. Could he truly open up to her after all these years? Could he share the feelings that had never gone away despite the time and distance? He couldn't stop thinking about her, about the way her smile made him feel young again, how easy it was to talk to her, like nothing had changed. And yet something inside him was still holding back. She had gone home that night, and so had he. They both returned to their separate lives, but there was no denying the fact that a shift had happened. They both knew it. They both felt it. But the man found himself battling between the familiar safety of his routine and the unfamiliar emotions that she brought back into his life. It was like being caught between two worlds, one where everything was predictable, and the other where everything was uncertain, but full of possibility. For the next few days, he thought about their conversation, what they had said, what they hadn't said. It was easy to fall back into old patterns of silence and restraint. He had spent so many years avoiding the pain of what might have been that he hadn't realized just how much he had been suppressing. And now, seeing her again, those feelings were resurfacing. But he wasn't sure what he wanted. Did he want to pick up where they left off? Or was he just looking for closure? His wife had noticed a change in him. She could tell he was distant, that his mind was elsewhere. The little things that used to bring him joy didn't seem to do so anymore. His enthusiasm for daily life was lacking, and even though he didn't talk about it, she sensed that something was eating away at him. One evening after dinner, she asked him straight out, "What's going on with you? You've been acting different. Is there something you need to talk about?" He hesitated. He knew that he couldn't lie to her, but the words felt impossible to say. How could he explain that part of him still longed for someone from his past, someone who had never truly left his heart? And yet he didn't want to hurt her. His wife had been good to him. They had built a life together, a family, a future. He didn't want to destroy all of that by bringing up something he should have let go of long ago. "I'm just thinking about some old things," he said finally, avoiding her eyes. "I guess seeing some people from the past brought up memories I wasn't ready for." She nodded, but he could tell that she wasn't entirely satisfied with his answer. She had always been the type to push for the truth, even when it wasn't easy to hear. But for now, he didn't want to talk about it. He needed more time to figure out what all of this meant. After their reunion, he had gotten a few more messages from her. Short, friendly notes, updates on her life, little things here and there. But it wasn't enough. He wanted more. He wanted to know what she had been thinking all these years. Did she think about him too? Or had she completely moved on? Was this just a nice reunion for old friends, or was there something more beneath the surface? He couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was more to their connection than just nostalgia. His phone buzzed again one evening as he sat at his desk. It was her. This time her message was different. It wasn't just a casual hello, it was an invitation. She asked if he would be interested in meeting again, just the two of them, to talk more. She even suggested a specific date. His heart raced as he read the message. Part of him wanted to say no, to avoid reopening old wounds. But another part of him, one that had been hidden for so long, wanted to say yes without hesitation. The truth was, he had never really stopped wanting to be around her. It was like there was an unfinished chapter in his life, and meeting her again felt like the opportunity to finally turn the page. He didn't want to be the one to seem too eager, but he didn't want to wait either. After a moment of hesitation, he typed back, agreeing to meet her. They set a time and place. The nerves in his stomach only grew stronger as the day approached. As the time neared, he found himself questioning his motivations. Was he simply longing for the past, trying to relive something that was gone? Or was there still something real, something worth exploring between them? He wasn't sure what he expected from their meeting, but it felt like he had no choice but to go. The pull to see her again was just too strong. On the day they were supposed to meet, he left work early, telling his wife he needed to run a few errands. He couldn't explain it, but the anticipation was almost overwhelming. When he walked into the cafe they had chosen, he found himself looking around, searching for her. She wasn't there yet, but he could already feel the butterflies in his stomach, the excitement building. He sat down at a table by the window, his hands shaking slightly. His mind raced, thinking about what he would say to her. Should he be casual? Should he open up about his feelings? Could he even admit that seeing her again had stirred something deep inside him? He didn't have long to wait. Moments later, the door opened and she stepped inside. When their eyes met, something inside him shifted. She was even more beautiful than he remembered, though time had changed her just as it had changed him. But there was still that same warmth in her eyes, the same softness to her smile. It felt like no time had passed at all. She walked over to his table and, without saying much, simply smiled and sat down. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was like two old friends reconnecting, but there was an underlying current of something more. Something unspoken. "How have you been?" she asked, breaking the silence. He smiled, feeling a bit more at ease now that they were face to face. "I've been okay, life's been busy, you know, but I've been thinking about you a lot since we last met." She nodded, as if she had been expecting him to say something like that. "I've been thinking about you too," she replied softly. "It's funny how life works. You never really know what you're supposed to do next." They talked for a while, catching up on the usual things: work, family, mutual friends. But all the while, there was something else hanging in the air. He could feel it between them, an unspoken understanding that neither of them wanted to address. Eventually, they fell into silence again, and this time, it wasn't awkward. It was as though both of them were waiting for the right moment. The moment to finally speak the words that had been waiting to be said for so long. She looked at him, her gaze soft but steady. "I know this might sound strange, but I've been wondering, do you ever think about what could have been?" The question caught him off guard. His heart skipped a beat as he realized that she had been thinking the same things he had. For all the years that had passed, for all the changes in their lives, it seemed that the feelings between them hadn't gone away. "I think about it all the time," he admitted. "About what could have been, about what we could have had. But I guess I just thought it was too late. Too much time had passed." She smiled softly, a knowing look in her eyes. "Maybe. Or maybe it's not too late for us to figure out what happens next." At that moment, he realized that he was no longer afraid. The words he had been holding back for so long finally came spilling out. "I've never stopped caring about you," he said quietly, his voice steady but full of emotion. "All these years I've thought about you, and I've never been able to let go of what we had." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. She reached across the table and took his hand. The simple touch, so familiar, felt like the beginning of something new. The beginning of something they both had been waiting for, whether they knew it or not. They spent the rest of the evening talking about everything they had missed, about the lives they had built, and about the possibility of starting something new. And for the first time in a long time, the man felt truly alive. He didn't know where this path would lead, but he knew one thing for sure. He was no longer afraid to see where it might take him. The weeks following their meeting felt like a blur. The man found himself consumed by thoughts of her, unable to push aside the emotions that had resurfaced so suddenly. Every time he thought about her, his heart would race. The weight of those feelings, buried for so many years, had come rushing back with a force he wasn't prepared for. It was as if time had played tricks on him, erasing the pain but not the love. He couldn't shake the sense of longing, of unfinished business. He spent his days going through the motions of his life, but his nights were different. His mind would drift back to her, their conversations, their laughter, the way they could pick up right where they left off. There was a comfort in that. It was as if no time had passed at all. Yet, despite the familiarity between them, there was still something that kept him at a distance, something he couldn't quite put into words. He still hadn't told her everything. They had shared their pasts, their present lives, but there was a part of him, a piece of his heart that he hadn't revealed. And the longer they spent together, the harder it became to say the words he knew he needed to. He wanted to tell her how much he had missed her, how much he had regretted the years they had lost. But the fear of it all, of reopening wounds, of disrupting the life he had built with his family, kept him silent. It wasn't just the fear of losing everything that held him back. It was the fear that she might not feel the same way, that all the hope, all the longing was just one-sided. What if after all these years she had moved on? What if she had forgotten about him, or worse, never truly felt the same way? He had spent a lifetime living with those doubts, and the idea of confronting them now was almost unbearable. But despite his hesitation, there was no denying the pull between them. The moments they spent together were easy, comfortable, and he couldn't help but think about the future. Could they really make something of this after so much time had passed? Was it even possible to start over, to rebuild what they had once shared? They agreed to meet again, a simple dinner at a quiet restaurant this time. There was no grand gesture, no special occasion. It was just two people reconnecting. But as he prepared for their meeting, he realized that it wasn't just a casual dinner to him. It was more than that. He was walking into it with the hope that this time they could have the conversation he had been avoiding for so long. When they met that evening, there was something different in the air. It wasn't just the usual excitement of seeing her again. There was a weight to the silence between them, an unspoken understanding that something important needed to be said. The moment he saw her, the familiar feeling of comfort rushed back, but this time it was laced with nervous anticipation. She smiled when she saw him, her face lighting up in that same way it always had. And for a moment he let himself relax, feeling the ease of being with her again. But the moment they sat down, he felt the pressure building. The time had come. He had to speak. "How have you been?" she asked, her voice soft but full of warmth. "I've been good," he replied, his voice betraying the nervousness he felt. "But I've been thinking a lot about everything. About us, I mean." She raised an eyebrow, sensing the shift in tone. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he began, his words slow and deliberate, "I've been thinking about all the years we lost. All the things we never said. And I don't want to go through life wondering what could have been." There was a pause, and for a moment he worried that he had said too much. But she didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned in slightly, her eyes focused on his as if waiting for him to continue. "I've spent so many years thinking that I had let go of you," he continued, the words finally tumbling out. "But seeing you again, it's like everything came flooding back. And I realized that I never really let go. Not completely." She sat quietly, her expression unreadable for a moment. He couldn't tell if she was surprised or if she had already known this was coming. But when she spoke, her voice was gentle. "I know exactly how you feel," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I've thought about you all these years. I didn't forget you. I didn't know what to do with all those feelings. After so long, I didn't think there was any point in reaching out. I thought we were too different now, that we had both moved on." "I did move on," he said quietly, "but part of me never did. I think I buried it because I didn't want to face it. I didn't want to risk everything. But now I realize I can't keep pretending." Her eyes softened and she reached across the table, her hand brushing against his. The simple gesture felt like a lifeline to him, something he had been waiting for without even realizing it. "I understand," she whispered. "I think we both needed time. Time to grow, time to figure things out. But that doesn't mean it's too late. We're not the same people we were before, but maybe that's a good thing. Maybe this time we can make it work." He looked into her eyes, searching for any hint of doubt. But there was none. She was as certain as he was that they had something worth exploring, something worth fighting for. And for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of peace settle over him. They spent the rest of the evening talking, really talking, about everything that had happened in their lives. They shared the stories they hadn't told before, the experiences that had shaped them, the regrets they both carried. It wasn't just about the past anymore. It was about the future. And for the first time, they both realized that the future might not be as impossible as it had seemed. As they finished their meal, the conversation naturally turned to what would happen next. They both knew it wouldn't be easy. They both had lives, families, responsibilities, but there was a determination in both of them, a shared belief that they could make this work. They were ready to see where this new chapter could take them, even if it meant taking things one step at a time. When they parted ways that night, it was different than the last time. It wasn't a goodbye or a maybe we'll see each other again. It was the beginning of something new. The beginning of the rest of their lives, whatever that might look like. Over the next few weeks, they continued to see each other. Slowly, they built a new kind of relationship, one that was based on honesty, understanding, and the willingness to be vulnerable. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of doubt, moments when life got in the way. But through it all, they found themselves coming back to each other, stronger than before. And as time passed, the man realized that this was what he had been waiting for all along. The love he had never truly let go of, the one that had always been a part of him, was finally becoming real again. And this time he wasn't going to let it slip away. The days and weeks that followed their heartfelt conversation felt like a new chapter in both of their lives. It wasn't always easy, and there were still moments of hesitation and uncertainty. But there was also something different, something real, something worth pursuing. They had both spent so many years wondering what could have been, but now they were living in the present, ready to see what would come next. For the man, it was an overwhelming feeling. He had spent decades wondering if he had missed his chance, if he had let the best thing that ever happened to him slip away. But now, seeing her again, there was a renewed sense of hope. He realized that sometimes life didn't go as planned for a reason. Sometimes it was about timing. And maybe, just maybe, the timing was finally right. They talked more than ever before. Every conversation, every moment together, felt like they were peeling back layers of the past and revealing pieces of themselves they had kept hidden for so long. They shared their dreams, their fears, and the lessons they had learned along the way. It wasn't just about rekindling old feelings, it was about discovering who they had become during the years they had spent apart. The man began to open up in ways he hadn't in years. He told her about his family, about the responsibilities he carried, about the dreams he had for the future. But most importantly, he told her how much he had missed her, how much he had regretted the years they had lost, but how grateful he was to have the chance to start again. It wasn't perfect. There were still challenges ahead, but they were facing them together, and that made all the difference. There were times when he felt the weight of his choices. He still had a family, a life he had built with his wife, and though he cared deeply for her, the reality of his feelings for the woman he had loved all those years ago didn't make it easy to navigate. It was a delicate balance, one he wasn't sure how to maintain, but one thing he knew for certain was that he couldn't ignore the truth anymore. He couldn't deny the love he felt for the woman who had always held a piece of his heart. The woman, too, had her own fears. She had lived a full life, too, and though she had always cared for him, the idea of opening herself up again wasn't easy. She had been hurt in the past just like he had, and it wasn't always easy to trust in something that felt so uncertain. But as she spent more time with him, as she saw how much he had changed and how deeply he cared for her, the wall she had built around her heart slowly began to come down. She realized that life was too short to live with regrets, and if this was the second chance they had both been waiting for, she wasn't going to waste it. They began to see each other more regularly, sometimes for coffee, sometimes for long walks, just enjoying each other's company and learning about the people they had become. It wasn't always romantic and it wasn't always easy, but there was a quiet understanding between them. They didn't need to rush things. They didn't need to try to make up for lost time. They just needed to be present, to be with each other, and to take things one step at a time. For the first time in years, the man felt a sense of peace he hadn't realized he was missing. He wasn't looking for answers anymore. He wasn't trying to force things to fit into the neat, predictable boxes he had once built for himself. He was simply allowing life to unfold, to let things happen as they were meant to. And in doing so, he found something he had always longed for, a connection that went beyond the surface, beyond the fear and beyond the doubts. One evening, after a quiet dinner, they sat together on a bench overlooking a small park. The sky had darkened, and the stars were just beginning to twinkle above them. It was one of those peaceful moments where everything felt right, where time seemed to slow down. They sat side by side, neither of them needing to speak. "I've thought a lot about this," the man said quietly, his voice almost a whisper in the stillness of the evening, "about how everything turned out, about how we ended up here." She turned to him, her gaze soft, her eyes filled with a mixture of understanding and hope. "And what do you think?" she asked, her voice gentle. He paused for a moment, looking up at the stars before answering. "I think that sometimes life doesn't go the way we plan. But maybe that's the point. Maybe we're not meant to have everything figured out from the start. Maybe we're just supposed to keep going, keep trying, keep learning. And if we're lucky, we find something worth holding on to." She smiled, her eyes glistening with the quiet emotion of the moment. "I think you're right," she said. "We can't always control what happens, but we can choose how we respond. And right now, I'm choosing to be here with you." He reached for her hand, his fingers gently brushing hers, and in that moment, everything felt like it was falling into place. They had both been through so much. They had both experienced love and loss, joy and heartbreak. But now they were here together, ready to face whatever the future might hold. There were still things to figure out. He still had his family to consider, and she had her own life to navigate. But for the first time in a long time, they both felt like they were on the same page. They didn't have all the answers, but they didn't need to. They were taking things one step at a time, allowing their connection to grow naturally, without forcing it. The next few months brought their share of challenges, as they tried to balance their past lives with the new possibilities that were emerging between them. There were difficult conversations, moments of doubt, and times when they both wondered if they were making the right choices. But through it all, they never lost sight of what mattered most: their connection, their bond, and the love they had rekindled after all these years. Eventually, the man found the courage to have an honest conversation with his wife. It was one of the hardest things he had ever done, but he knew it was necessary. He explained everything: the past, the feelings he had for the woman he had loved, and the fact that he could no longer ignore the truth of his heart. It wasn't an easy conversation, and it didn't solve everything right away, but it was the beginning of a new chapter for all of them. The woman, too, took the time to reflect on what she wanted. She knew that whatever happened, it wouldn't be easy, but she also knew that she couldn't deny the love she had for him. She couldn't ignore the second chance they had been given, and so, with time, she made peace with her own choices and opened her heart to the possibility of a future with him. In the end, their story wasn't one of instant perfection or easy answers. It was messy, complicated, and filled with moments of uncertainty. But it was also beautiful because it was real. They had both learned that love wasn't about finding the perfect time or the perfect circumstances. It was about showing up, being vulnerable, and choosing to fight for what mattered. And as they stood together, looking out at the future, they knew one thing for certain. No matter what came next, they had found something worth fighting for, and that was all they needed.